Oh, I'm a good old rebel, now that's just what I am. For this fair land of freedom, I do not care a damn. I'm glad I fit against it, I only wish we'd won. And I don't want no pardon for anything I've done.
This is Rebel Yell, a Southern Nationalist podcast of the alt-right. I'm your host, Masonius Rufus. Joining me are my co-hosts, Macon's Ghost and Ryan McMahon. For our 65th episode of Rebel Yell, Identity Dixie is proud to present The Talks from the Atlanta Forum. And we're going to be expanding our platform soon, so please throw some shekels our way. Thanks, guys.
And I'll be your host for the Atlanta Forum here. I have a tendency to lecture because I lecture to a lot of people. I'm more of an educator than an inspirational speaker. But I got the easiest topic in the world, and that is like how we got here. And Mr. Dixon, hey. I was a libertarian, and I was radicalized by the war. Now, I became a Marine after 9/11, and you'll find that a lot of veterans from that war became libertarians because of the indifference of the bureaucracy and the seeming uselessness of that war. And if you were a right-wing dissident back in the early aughts, you were probably a libertarian. Now, I know a lot of us have been in nationalism a lot longer, but that's how I got into being a member of the dissident right. Now, what happened in 2008, it was that Barack Obama was elected president, and identity politics ratcheted up, and libertarians were completely unable to deal with identity politics. Now, what happened to me was I started on TacuMag and VDare and Ameren, and I started learning these arguments. Now, at the time, a lot of libertarians became neo-reactionaries is the term. And the word they used for this process was the Dark Enlightenment, because it felt sort of like dirty and immoral to learn these facts. But you couldn't help but learn them because of it was so powerful, the explanation of, what we're dealing with. Now, a much greater man than I, named Sam Francis, diagnosed what we're dealing with as anarcho-tyranny. Because we have the middle class, the mostly white middle class that pays for everything and behaves and obeys the law. They're being tyrannized, and they're being, with ever greater laws and taxes to pay for a revolutionary underclass. So we have two enemies, an enemy from the elites, the tyrants, and an enemy from the revolutionary underclass. While the government is permissive toward that underclass, they allow them to get away with things that we know that we wouldn't be able to ever get away with. And so the answer to our problems, and the answer that nationalists have, that is the answer, is solidarity. And the word is identity. Identity means sameness in Latin. It means, and what it's describing politically is, when I identify with someone, I consider their gain to be my gain, and their loss to be my loss, because the ego is elastic. And it's sort of like the old joke about, you might like to beat up your little brother, but no one else is allowed to do it, because there's a line of identity that goes around him. Between you two, it's, no holds barred. But if a third party comes in, well then, they're not allowed to touch him, no matter how much you like to bully him. And the same thing goes for politics. Here in the United States, we have a white middle class, mostly white, that pays for everything. And we are the founding population of this country. And we have an elite, a government class that doesn't identify with us. And they have conspired to support an invasion of this country to drive down wages. And to secure, as Peter Brimelow calls it, they've decided to elect a new people. It doesn't matter what we think, because they'll replace us with people that will vote for them. And this conspiracy, between the elites and between a revolutionary underclass is pretty universal, actually. And the right wing in this country is representing the middle class. It's not representing the elites. And if you think the elites are your friends, it's like you're going to be lost because they're not your friends. In order to fight these identity wars, we have to have solidarity. And solidarity is neither left nor right. Because egalitarianism, the belief that all men are created equal, it's usually considered part of the left. But historically, the right in the United States has been classical liberal, well, at least since the Paleos. And that was once considered a leftist concept, liberty. But the problem with liberty, and I'm still a libertarian, but I'm not just a libertarian anymore. The problem with liberty is that it's individualism. And as long as you're an individual, you're always going to be disarmed against these groups. It's like bringing a knife to a gunfight if you don't have a tribe to fight these tribal wars. So we must have solidarity, identity. And it is moral that we do so. Now, I, became radicalized by the war. And when Barack Obama came to office, it's like the libertarians didn't have any of the answers to what we're dealing with. That man was elected purely on identity politics. He's an empty suit. He's never done anything of note. But he's a symbol onto which people project what they want to believe about, race in the United States. And of course, he used his office to allow what was essentially like black nationalists, to run his departments. And we started seeing these incidents like Trayvon Martin, like Mike Brown. And we know instinctively that things would have been completely different had they been white. Had it been one of us, no one would have cared that we were shot if we had been in Trayvon Martin's shoes. And most people would have thought that we deserved it. And the same thing goes for Mike Brown. He attacked a police officer, through his cruiser window. And everyone knows, what would happen to you or me if we did that. And we know that the bystanders lied. They lied to grand juries and all sorts of things that we would never get away with. And the reason why we wouldn't get away with them is because we're white. It's not because we're Republican. It's not because, we're libertarians or national. It's because we're white. As Devlin says, F. Roger Devlin, race means everything to our enemies because it has given them the greatest victories, and it really has. Without racial politics, they wouldn't have secured any of the victories that they've secured over us. And being a right-winger, it really feels like getting your butt kicked, for the past few decades. The way we fight back is by forming an identity. And that is and it is moral that we should do so, by the way. Back in the early aughts, Molyneux, he wrote an article called The Moral Case for Libertarianism. And basically, he presented it as violence. We are against violence, we're pro-civilization, libertarians are. But that's what we're going to have to do for solidarity and identity. We're going to have to make the moral case. Now, when I joined the alt-right, the alt-right is filled with troll culture. Bullying the bullies. And we've been bullied all our lives, by the way. And it feels great to bully them back. And I encourage that. That's fun, and that's what we're doing. And they're going to hate us for making fun of the Holocaust and all their golden calves. But keep trolling, keep bullying them, because the way that you fight a bully, you don't run away. You stand up to him and you bully him back. And it's moral that you should do that. At the same time, we're going to have to build moral arguments for identity, and there's plenty of them. One argument is that it is inescapable because every single living thing on earth protects its kin and identifies with its kin. And if it didn't, it wouldn't exist. Whether it's a bacteria, a bee, a tree, they all do it. Now, nature's God has made this. So it doesn't matter whether you believe in Genesis or Darwin. This is the case. This is a fact. And with knowing this makes us powerful because it's true. right? When you have tribalism, when you have a dual code of morality, it's amity for my kinsman, enmity for the stranger and the alien. And honest communication cannot take place between tribes. Only your brothers are individuals, and they can have their arguments about economics or politics and all sorts of things, and it'll be honest arguments. But the stranger, the alien, you can't have an honest argument with him, because he'll be honest with you. The way the dual code works is that your tribesmen are individuals, but the enemy are just representatives of groups. And it requires collective punishment to get those groups to police their own members, their own tribesmen's behavior. And this is the way, like I said, that nature and nature's God has decreed it. Now, whether atoms or providence, that's the way it is. And we have to form an identity. And it's moral that we should do so. Now, I got involved in TRS, a merry band of trolls, back in 2015. I am religious, by the way. I heard the show the first day it dropped in August of 2014, and Trayvon Martin, or was it Mike Brown? I think that was Mike Brown by then. But it's fortuitous, it's fateful that I heard it the day it dropped, like 3 hours after it dropped, and I started listening to The Daily Shoah. And by then, I'd listened to the Voice of Reason Network and all the podcasts on the alt-right, and I'd become, desensitized to the humor. There was a time where I wouldn't have listened to something called The Daily Shoah. That's just beyond the pale, right? And I met Enoch and Bulbasaur at that Amrin in the spring of 2015, and they said, yeah, it's just a Facebook group, get on, So I got into TRS, and 2 months later, we had what one troll called the Week of Fags and Flags, the Charleston shooting. And then the Supreme Court handed down all its decisions, and they were all against us, by the way, in the white middle class. And I felt awful. I remember that day, it was a Monday afterwards, and 4 corporations simultaneously banned the sale of the battle flag. And it's sort of amazing they could all get on the same page. I mean, they're supposed to be rivals, right? That's the official story, right? They had no problem getting on the same page. And they banned it. And I remember feeling horrible. And I was just a new guy, in TRS. And then Ryan McMahon's like, I'm like, we need something. We need a campaign, Battle Flag the 4th. And then Ryan McMahon stepped up and he said, yep, we'll create a page and we'll promote it. So that's why a Californian, I know many people wonder why a Californian is on a Southern Nationalist podcast, and that's why, because he started it all. And after the Battle Flag the 4th campaign, we just, we became Sally the Southern. It's a bad joke. There's some sort of cartoon named Lizzie the Lesbian, and we were going to counter that paused cartoon with something wholesome, Sally the Southern. And then I fought the Facebook war, and it was there were flaggers, but there was a lot of bad news. I remember that fall of 2015. Everyone was backing down. Now, we have a history, and we have monuments, and we have symbols. We are a people. And that cowardice in the face of our enemies is just inexcusable, right? There's nothing virtuous about it. And if you don't have courage, you don't have any other virtue, by the way. It doesn't matter how right you are, right? You got to have courage. So we had determined that we were going to fight the good fight, and TRS was more than nice enough to let us do that. The death panel were a bunch of Yankees, but they were happy to let the Southern Nationalists build up underneath them. And then that January, Macon's Ghost came to me and said, well, let's start a podcast. Everyone else is doing it. And the TRS model has been very successful. You put up a flag, and then you see if you have any allies. People listen to the podcast, and then they come your way. And then the alt-right is an online phenomenon. I get to throw them in my Facebook group and everything else. And we were TRS Confederates, and we created this flag. Ryan had it made. I think I'm going to send it to Mike Enoch. That was the original goal. It was after he spoke, I would hand it over to him and say, thank you, here's your banner. Thank you for building this, helping me build this company of Southern Nationalists. And he's going to love it. I know he's going to. Now, after we got going, TRS Confederates and Rebel Yell, we learned how to, put out constant content, and I don't think it was anything that people expected, because I'm just a nerd, personally. I'm just a nerd, There's no hooting and hollering. There's no, drops, funny drops. It's like, I have a sense of humor, but I'm nothing like those pros over the death panel. But I've had a lot of people come to me and say thank you, because what I did was directly attack the stereotypes against us. We are dumb, that we don't know what we're talking about. We're a bunch of good old boys. And we are the founding fathers. Everything that you like about the United States probably comes from the South, honestly. The Virginia dynasty and all that. And it's been a hell of a year. 2016 was a hell of a year for the alt-right. We got to ride Trump's coattails, and he had all the right enemies. It was fantastic. We had the conservative moment where we threw those words together. Now, someone did it before us, but these sort of things, it's so hard to find out who did it first. But I remember we popularized it, and that's when we got really serious about OPSEC. It's like we were famous or something, TRS was. And then after the conservative moment, we just had victory after victory. There were fasci goys everywhere, Pepes everywhere. And this past month, the left has had its revenge on us. They, like, what do we do about the alt-right? The alt-right was mentioned by Hillary Clinton. It's like we were important. And they made sure to have their revenge. They doxed the entire death panel. And then the different groups within the movement, everyone wants something a little different. If you're more Germanic, you're probably a little bit harder on the JQ than Southern Nationalists are. And I've gone through the last couple of weeks, trying to assure everyone and keep everyone together. But I think we've pulled through it. And, TRS is going to continue producing media. And the Rebel Yell and TRS Confederates decided that we were going to become Identity Dixie. And we needed to be in charge of our principles, and we were always going to do it anyway. But, and I managed to secure a way to do it without there being any ill will. We got to secede. My intern even fired on Fort Sumter. It was hilarious. Tried to get us kicked out. But now that we're Identity Dixie, it's like we're going to draw up our principles. But what I always wanted to do with this movement was not to produce just media. You use the media to do something else, and that is network. No matter what you want to do. I mean, some NRXers are pacifists. That means the opposite of activism. A lot of people are activists. We have TWP well represented here. And there's a lot of trolls are probably never really going to come outside, and they don't have to. They're doing right-wing media. They are bullying the bullies online. So the alt-right, what is the alt-right? It's all those things, right? It's right-wing media. It's education. It's activism. It's networking. What I want to do with Identity Dixie is we all need to form a Männerbund. That's the fancy German word for it, and all it means is the men's band, a band of brothers, right? Because as Mr. Dixon has said, one man, no man, as the ancient Greeks. If you are one man, you're not going to be able to fight this tribal conflict with our enemies. You need a shield wall against our enemies. You need solidarity. And practically every attack on the middle class is predicated on the fact that white men do not have solidarity with each other. And so we need something that we can form a strong shield wall against cultural Marxism, against anarcho-tyranny, whatever you want to call our enemies. And we do have terrible enemies, by the way. I know I've been talking about just the history and all this, but the South is being ethnically cleansed. It's being ethnically cleansed It's driving down wages. There are barrios everywhere. And with anarcho-tyranny, you know, if you take a driver's license away from a drunk white man, you really hurt him. He might lose his job. But you do it from a Latino, and he'll just get another one. And this is known and whispered about. But this sort of anarcho-tyranny, they expect them to break the law. They expect them to get away with it. And they hold us to even higher standards than, year after year. So we have to fight both our elite enemies and, the people that are replacing us. And we're going to need more media. I've been encouraging different states to come up and set up their own podcasts, Rebel Yell style, and gather together fasci goys to form this network, this Männerbund. And we have the traditional activist organizations that you can join too. I'm mostly interested in, let's get the network, and then we can figure out what to do with it. And I want to thank you all, for showing up. I mean, this started off on that awful day. I guess it was June 24th when we formed Battle Flag the 4th. That was one of the worst days of my life, because I knew what was about to happen. People were going to run away from the enemy. They weren't going to fight. And all those beautiful things that our ancestors fought for and built, they were going to be torn down. And meanwhile, you were going to have heritage not hate crowds that were allowing it to happen. And there's nothing virtuous about that, by the way. That's cowardice, right? They hate you because you're white. As there's something in the alt-right, or it's called the mantra. It's what do you do when someone says you're a racist? And I've always liked the mantra. Enoch does too. It's you're just saying that because I'm white. Anti-racist is just a code word for anti-white, and that's absolutely true. And say again, sir.
I say that was written by a Southerner.
Yeah. Yeah. And I never stopped being a Christian. I'm very dominionist, and I don't have any moral problem with this fight. In fact, this fight needs to happen. I have a moral problem with the running away, the cowardice. And, I learned a lot from the libertarians, and I think we can use a lot of their knowledge to fight our elite enemies. But to fight the revolutionary underclass, we're going to need to be Spartans at Thermopylae, members of phalanx. And I think that we will succeed, personally. And I'm not just saying that to rally the troops. It's been a long time coming, this thing. And once we get together, who could stop us? I mean, really. If you look back at American history, like most of these arguments involving non-white peoples, well, they're all arguments taking place within the white community, different sections of the country, different economic interests. It's almost like only white opinions, matter. If we can get enough white men on the same page, well, then we'll be unstoppable and we will win. But it will involve courage on your part. And I'm telling you all, it's like, try to remember that. You don't have any other virtue if you don't have courage, fortitude. And I'm going to continue doing what I'm doing, for this movement. But we need more leaders. And if you stand up now, you will have first mover advantage of being a leader. You'll lead the future government, because we are the future government. Because winners look like a government in waiting. We have to professionalize, we have to form organizations and take back this country, and we will. The middle class, the working class, they're the ones that pay for everything. You wouldn't have a country without them. But we can have a country without all the parasites, the elites, the underclass. They're completely unnecessary. So, let's keep going, is what I'm saying. And there's going to be more hits like the hits that we took this past month. And but that's a sign of strength and not weakness. And we finally got important enough that someone did, professional opposition research and came after TRS. And that was always going to happen. And Enoch, Enoch's going to be all right. He's going through turmoil in his personal life, so he said he'd be here otherwise. That's the only reason why he's not here. But he's going to be all right, and he's going to go back to doing the show, and they're going to get a lot more new people. And I think Rebel Yell will continue to grow. So that's the history. Now you know why Ryan McMahon, a Californian, is in the group and why he's the leader. I think I'm about done, Cushman. What you guys have any questions? Just go ahead and ask me questions if you have any. All right. Thank you for coming to the Atlanta Forum. We're going to have more speakers, and I think we'll probably take a break for a few minutes, and then we'll continue on. Thank you, gentlemen.
Ladies and gentlemen, fellow Southern nationalists, it's good to be here at this groundbreaking event. I would like to extend my heartfelt thanks to those who put on the Atlanta Forum, and it is an honor and a privilege to have the opportunity to speak today, and I look forward with great anticipation to many forums to come. Friends, we are living in exciting times. Nationalism is on the rise across the globe. I remember not that long ago, while at the National Conference for the League of the South, the results came back from the Brexit vote, and Brad's not back in. I remember we were sitting around the campfire when it came in, and it was quite a shock. And it shocked the world. The media and the powers that be said that it could not be done. However, the people of Great Britain had enough with globalism and the European Union. Globalism and liberalism had begun to crack and showed that it no longer had a stranglehold on Europe and the West. Soon after, other European nations increasingly questioned whether or not their interests were being best served in Brussels. We are witnessing what many believed impossible. In France, nationalism and the right are beginning to take over the political spectrum. We witness the far right in Austria coming incredibly close to securing power, and support for nationalism has risen throughout mainland Europe and Great Britain. Recently, North America had its own Brexit moment. Despite the polls, the pundits, the predictions, and the incessant babbling of the lying media, Donald Trump won the White House. Not only was his underdog victory in and of itself incredibly surprising, but on his way to victory, we witnessed several groundbreaking events in North American politics. First, what was expected to be a mere crowning of Hillary Clinton as the nominee of the Democratic Party turned into a hotly contested battle with Bernie Sanders. Accusations were laid against the Democratic establishment, and rightfully so, of rigging the primary process and stealing the election. However, the most notable outcome of the primary process was the complete evisceration of the GOP establishment. The National Review, GOP leaders in Congress, and the Bush dynasty attempted to torpedo Trump's rise in the polls. Yet at the end, they were stripped of much of their power and influence, and Trump won by a wide margin. Most commentators were astonished, not only at the primary results, but even more so at Trump's victory. They failed to see what was right in front of them. Classical liberalism, better known as conservatism, has been cast aside for nationalism. Trump rode the global wave that is increasingly embracing nationalism and rejecting classical liberalism and so-called conservatism. The collapse of American conservatism has much larger and more important ramifications in the presidential election. We are living in an age that witnesses the end of American liberal hegemony across the globe. Not only are we living in a multipolar world with multiple geopolitical powers vying for dominance, something that we have not seen in almost a century, but we are also seeing the end of the ideological dominance of liberal ideas such as freedom, equality, and democracy. Until recently, the United States wrote the narrative for much of the world's cultural and political actions. All those who opposed it, such as Hussein, Assad, Gaddafi, and Putin, were either given swift punishment or were put under massive pressure by the United States' economic and military hegemony. However, this is no longer the case. Trump himself has expressed interest in restoring friendly relations with Russia, much to the chagrin of the establishment on both sides of the aisle. U.S. military intervention in Syria, at least in support of ISIS and the rebels, is now pretty much off the table. A groundwork is being laid for a future in U.S. global politics that is relinquishing global hegemony. That's huge. If we are to see the success of Southern of the nationalism that seems to be sweeping the globe, then it is imperative that the Yankee American Republic continue its current trend away from global hegemony. The American Republic is the premier enemy of nationalism, Christianity, traditionalism, and all that is good and holy. If we as Southern nationalists must work within the Union, it must be for the express goal of seeing the United States fall from its position of near complete global influence. The collapse of liberalism in America is a providential step in this direction. Central to this paradigm shift in North America is the rise of the South in American politics. For instance, in this previous election, Trump was elected not because of combatants in a 21st century meme war, not because he pandered to the left, not because he towed the GOP conservative line, but because normal, decent Southerners chose Trump and his soft nationalism over Bush and Cruz in the primaries, and because they overwhelmingly chose Trump over Clinton. And to finish the job, white working-class voters in the Rust Belt chose to throw in their lot with the traditional South instead of the Yankees in New England. The first time that has happened, I believe, in history. The locus of political power and influence is shifting, and it is shifting to the South. We have a golden opportunity to influence the political and social narrative for the foreseeable future in ways we haven't been able to do in more than 100 years. We are riding the global wave of nationalism, and we are joining countless others across the world in rejecting liberalism, constitutionalism, and democracy. We are no longer relegated to irrelevance, and the bourgeoisie Yankees may not like it, but I think they know it. Southerners have begun to think and act as a group in terms of interest as opposed to in terms of ideology. This is most certainly why the average white working-class Southerner in the heart of the Bible Belt chose Trump over Cruz, even if Cruz's proclaimed ideology of conservatism and family values may have been more in line with the ideology of most Southerners. However, it was Southern interests that ruled the day. It furthered Southern interests to build the wall. It furthered Southern interests to bring jobs back from overseas, and it furthered Southern interests to return to economic nationalism. Ted Cruz and the establishment Republicans had proven they did not represent Southern interests. Time after time, House and Senate Republicans refused to be an opposition party to the liberal establishment. The Gang of Eight had sold the South out and caused more and more immigration, primarily to the southern states. They did not act in interests of their constituents. So the South went with someone, at least who it appeared to, was concerned about their interests. In our movement today, it is imperative that we learn from this and understand it. Any real nationalism is centered primarily on the well-being of one's own people. Many mistake nationalism for something different. The primary mistake in this matter is centering nationalism on having your own state or independence. This begins to center the argument around an abstraction, the state, as opposed to natural and organic realities. Our goal as Southern nationalists, which is aptly stated in the League of the South mission statement, is the survival and well-being of the Southern people. The entire question of independence must hinge on whether or not it is beneficial to our people. Real nationalism is not an abstracted, universal principle that all ethnic groups must be separate and equal. This is little better than civic nationalism, as it is entirely arbitrary and not grounded in anything real or organic. Allow me to use an example from recent history. A few years back, Scotland voted to secede from the United Kingdom. As some would have us to believe, this must be a good thing, because of course the Scottish people are at least somewhat distinct from the English, Welsh, and Northern Irish. So of course, they should have their independence. However, when approached from the ethical grounds of nationalism as the survival and well-being of one's own people, no Scottish person should have desired independence from the United Kingdom. Independence for Scotland would have been a victory for the progressive left, for even more rampant immorality and licentiousness, for subordination to the EU, and for more and more third world immigrants. The only possible way that independence for Scotland could have been a good thing is if independence in and of itself was some sort of virtue, and liberty and equality were the most important ethical factors at play. However, I know of many nationalists who support Scottish independence wholeheartedly. This is illustrative of a deep flaw in our thinking as Southern nationalists. For too long, we've imbibed at the poisonous well of the ideologies of the American Republic, the Constitution, and the Declaration of Independence. In no way good in and of itself, and to say otherwise is modernism. The state is not the nation. It is an institution that serves the nation. The nation is natural and organic. It is our people. We were Southern before the American Rebellion against Britain, and we were Southern before we had our own state for a few years, and we will be Southern as long as God gives us breath. We are Southern by birth and by blood. As such, Southern nationalism should center around the reality of our people's well-being, not just procuring for ourselves a political state. Our ancestors understood this clearly, especially in regards to the institution of Negro slavery. Since the state is not the nation itself and merely serves the nation, the Southern states before and during its relationship with the Union encompassed more than just our people. Their solution was not to forge a state that governed only our own people. It was to subordinate the Negroes to our people inside one state. This served both their interests and ours, at least in that time. Both groups maintained distinct identities. We did not become the Negro, and he certainly did not become us. Yet we maintained a real nationalism, improved the well-being of our people, and maintained our identity while not limiting the Southern state to one particular group of people. This can be instructive to us in the current age when there are crucial questions that must be answered in regards to those who live among us, yet are not our people. However, at this point in our people's history, there can be nothing more integral to our survival and well-being than maintaining and restoring our Southern identity. Southern nationalism is thinking from being Southern. If our people have no identity, we cannot survive, and we absolutely cannot secure our well-being. As such, this issue should be in the forefront of our minds as Southern nationalists. In this current age of nationalism, we have some golden opportunities to grow and build up our people's self-aware identity. At every possible juncture, we must view and portray to our people the actions of the new political establishment in light of how it affects us here in Dixie. We must use our newfound influence and power in this godless republic in whatever ways we can to bend its policies and actions to our benefit as Southerners. We must work to ensure the prominence of our symbols and our culture in our land. And we must flee from every foreign ideology or worldview that undermines our identity as Southerns. On the subject of identity, one of the greatest threats to Southern nationalism and Southern identity is that rank cancer of universal white nationalism. It's Yankee poison. There are nations that are white, ours included, but there is no white nation. White nationalism is a misnomer. National identity is much more than being of the same broad race. It is ethnicity, blood, heritage, language, culture, religion, and a shared history. Now, I understand there are some genuinely good white folks, some of whom were not blessed to be born in a cohesive, organic nation such as we Southerners were. More power to them if they are genuinely seeking to better their own people through white nationalism in the deracinated, dramatic Midwest or some urban corner of the Northeast. But it is not for us as Southern nationalists. As Southern nationalists, we have our own people, our own history, our own symbols, and our own nation. We don't need to seek Heil or role play as continental national socialists or elevate any foreign worldview, religion, or political ideology in order to be nationalists. Southern identity and interests should be our primary end. We must forever remember that great bastion of evil and wickedness called the United States of America was founded as a propositional white nation. It truly was that great white city on a hill, free to all whites of European ancestry to stake their claim, in subordination, of course, to the Enlightenment ideals of freedom and liberty. Yet such a deal with the devil and the Puritan Yankee was disastrous to our people, and look where it led. To be quite simple, we are not in the same team as the Yankee. And when I say Yankee, to clarify, I'm not speaking of all non-Southerners. Speaking of the descendants of the Puritans in New England, who have been our civilizational rivals and enemies since we landed on this continent. So we are not on the same team as the Yankee, whether he's white or not. And before somebody says no more brother wars, maybe they should have told that to Sherman and his marauding army of mercenaries that they killed our fathers, raped our sisters, took our property, and reduced our ancestral homeland to ashes. As such, we must not tolerate Southern nationalism being subordinated to Yankee white nationalism. Southern nationalism must be by Southerners and for Southerners. And as such, Southern nationalism must have Southern leadership. We are not a quaint, interesting subset of some global struggle of white nationalism. And our interests are sometimes quite different from the interests of other white nations in Europe and the New World. And only our people can be truly, fully invested in our own well-being. This is especially important in the age of internet nationalism and the alt-right. Whether we like it or not, we are part of the broader movement of the alt-right. The alt-right is a broad, mainstream, large phenomena. It's bigger than any of us, and we are identified with it, even if we do not identify as it. But how we navigate these waters is integral to whether or not Southern nationalism survives or becomes amalgamated into a non-nationalistic alt-right. In the same way that any relationship with the Union must be viewed through the lens of our interests, we must approach the alt-right and internet nationalism in terms of Southern interests and Southern power. We must, at least to a certain extent, and in certain cases, deepen the us versus them mentality. I've been encouraged to the extent which this is currently the case. Take, for example, that horrific Americana proposition that half of Dixie be amalgamated into the new white American Republic and the other half be given over to the Negro. Many of our people recoiled at the very thought of it. Our interests must never be subordinated to the interests of the Yankee or any other foreigner, even if we do have to work with them sometimes. On a deeper, more religious and philosophical level, we must reject the will to power worldview of the broader alt-right and continental fascism forms of nationalism. As Southerners, we have a rich traditionalist and classical heritage. We are part of the historic Christian faith. And as such, we must understand that the survival and well-being of our people will only be accomplished by the Spirit of God, not the arm of men. We cannot will ourselves to political dominance any more than we can will ourselves to salvation. While the Yankee Puritan attempts to create by his own hand a brave new future and world, we must understand that human society and politics is controlled by the will of Jehovah, the God of our fathers. As such, it is the favor of the Lord that should be foremost in our minds. With the blessings of God, we will prevail, but if we reject Him in favor of a form of modern Antichrist nationalism, we will be destroyed. Almighty God redeemed us at Calvary when Christ died not only for us as individuals, but for our people. We must serve Him and obey His law, for He made us, and this is our greatest duty. God created Dixie as He created every nation on the earth, and He wants us to survive and continue, but in obedience to Him. Southern nationalism is a holy and a righteous cause, commissioned by Almighty God Himself. It cannot be embraced lightly or by those who reject our Savior and His church. And it must not be conformed into the image of the enemies of God who embrace a false and immoral nationalism. Friends, I cannot stress enough that all nationalisms are not equal, and all are not good. This may not be popular or liked by some of us, but all those who claim to be on our side are not truly so. Those who puff themselves up as gods on earth, who seek to advance their cause by their own will and power, who do not bow to Christ and instead hail victory in their own achievements, they are not always our friends. Instead of submitting to the yoke of Christ, many of today's nationalists raise their fists to heaven by embracing homosexuals and other publicly wicked men. Instead of being content with the created order instituted by God, many who claim to be on our side seek to destroy and overthrow this order and build in its place a society made in their own image. Thus saith the Lord, take heed unto yourselves, lest ye forget the covenant of the Lord your God, which He made with you. For the Lord thy God is a consuming fire, even a jealous God. Our people have been redeemed by Christ and sanctified for His purposes, but our people have done much for which we need to repent. Southern nationalism must be that repentance and not a hardening of our hearts. Southern nationalism must be our people prostrating themselves before their King. Finally, friends, on a practical note, we must also remember who it is we are fighting for. In the age of technology and social media, it can be very easy to become enveloped in the internet ghetto of white nationalism or the alt-right. It can be very easy to make Southern nationalism about us, the few who get it, and reject and disdain the real-world normies as irrelevant to our cause. However, as Southern nationalists, we are fighting for our people, the Southern people. They are an inheritance of God, purchased at Calvary, all of them. Southern nationalism must be for the 55-year-old Southern farmer, the 28-year-old blue-collar worker, the 60-year-old Southern lawyer, and the Southern wife, mother, son, and daughter. As such, Southern nationalism must be able to speak to them and for them. While it may be fun to troll on Twitter or post on message boards, and it can be beneficial, edgy memes and internet speak alone will not solve our people's problems, nor will it awake the vast majority of them to Southern nationalism. Southern nationalism must be able to speak to the real world. We already know that we cannot achieve our goals through our own will and strength. We must instead do our best to prepare and help our people ride this global wave of nationalism that has been created by the providence of God. We must do our best to see that we come out on the other side in the right place. This is why I was to hear of this forum. It provides a place to put faces to Twitter handles and turn internet acquaintances into real-life friends and begin to shape the narrative of Southern nationalism that we can bring forth into our own corners of Dixie. And I look forward to seeing this become a reality as we work together in the future. By the grace of Almighty God, I have a sure hope that Southern nationalism has a bright future. A future not only for us, but a future for our children and progeny. A future for our people, a future for our nation, Dixie. And victory or damnation, we must fight this fight into the end. For our children, for our people, and for our God. God save the South.
Okay, well, thanks for the introduction, Michael. Is the mic good? Mic good? Okay, well, you introduced me as OccidentalDescent.com, and of course, that's my own personal website. But, big news, I'm sure many of you have heard, we got a new hub site called altright.com. And I formed a partnership with Richard Spencer, and we're working together on that. So, without further ado, the title of what I wrote for this is The Alternative South. All right. Southern nationalism is facing a crisis. The crisis began around late 2014 when a year and a half of public rallies by the League of the South had begun to take its toll. We had spent the previous 2 years building up an amazing real-world network of activists all across the South. Many of you, we've been friends for years because all the rallies we did. There was nothing else like it on the American far right. Nothing like that was going on anywhere. We were holding monthly public demonstrations. We were having annual national conferences. We had state conferences. We had private events. It's been going on for years. Believe me, it was fun taking it into the real world after spending a decade or more camped out in the anonymity of cyberspace. We learned that our enemies in Dixie were not as organized as we had imagined them to be. We learned that doxing is not as problematic here as it is elsewhere. For example, I live in rural Alabama, so when people hear that, oh, you're behind OccidentalDescent.com, that's great, high five. They like it, It's not like it is in the Upper East Side of Manhattan, like, Mike Enoch. So, we learned that various issues like opposition to immigration and refugee resettlement were broadly popular in our region. We went and protested that in Murfreesboro and Shelbyville, Tennessee, the jihad. That was before all the jihadist attacks, including one in Chattanooga. In hindsight, I think you can say that we saw the whole Trump movement coming. Somewhere along the way, though, we began attracting women to our movement. It is striking how most of us are married and have young children now, including happy father here about me. We can't do the public activism like we used to anymore because our responsibilities have multiplied. If you look at the far right as a whole, it is not really a problem we should be complaining about. Whereas white nationalists have argued about the lack of women in the movement, our wives spend enormous amounts of time talking and networking on Facebook. Women seem to really enjoy the social aspect of our movement that you can't get by interacting exclusively with anonymous people online. We don't go to immigration rallies now so much as weddings and baby showers. Got one coming up next weekend. Anyway, Anyway, I look back fondly on 2013 and 2014. I got married, had a son, and met lots of great people who share my views all across the South, including these two gentlemen right here. That was fun. That was valuable. That was a good investment. We needed an institution that would enable us to propagate our views, coordinate our energies, build real-world networks, challenge the status quo in public space, and overcome the well-known weaknesses, for example, the autism and extremism of a purely online movement. At the same time, we eventually came to see the limitations of this approach. It was easy for the opposition to violate our civil rights and knock down billboards, which were very expensive to put up. It was impossible to keep up the pace of all the rallies we were doing. We were doing one every other month. It was too expensive. There was too much traveling, and we hit a ceiling in the number of people who would come out and join us. More than anything else, though, the constant bickering on Facebook over small points of disagreement and the willingness of some to tread into violent territory, which made others uncomfortable, began to fracture the movement. What's the point of spending so much time recruiting ordinary people at public rallies only to squander it by alienating them with extreme antisocial comments on social media? So during the first half of 2015, the pace of our public rallies began to slow down. Several leaders, including Michael Cushman here, dropped out of the League of the South. And that was the case until the Dylann Roof mass shooting in Charleston ignited a campaign of cultural genocide across the South. We lost the Confederate battle flag at the South Carolina State House. The Southern Heritage Movement and the League of the South were briefly re-energized. We held more rallies than ever before. But eventually, the news cycle rolled on, the enemy was repulsed, enthusiasm faded, and burnout returned as a major problem. In the midst of the reaction to Charleston, though, Donald Trump announced he was running for president on June 16th, 2015, and everything was about to change. The inconceivable started to happen. Southern nationalists weren't prepared for Donald Trump. We are so accustomed to thinking regionally, but the anger and alienation that we saw at our protests in the South was national in scope. It was even global. No one was even trying to summon all that anger and alienation and channel it against the liberal establishment. How should we feel about this? We have been too narrowly focused on the Confederacy. We never entertained the possibility of a successful nationalist and populist revolt in our lifetimes. Another Andrew Jackson, put into the White House by a Middle American Radicals coalition led by the South. The populists had mounted a fierce challenge in the 1890s and even briefly captured the Democratic Party, but they were beaten back. We have just witnessed the most improbable election since Andrew Jackson's victory in 1828. In light of our own history, we shouldn't be surprised. It actually makes sense when you think about it. Radical Reconstruction changed the nature of our people. Previously, the South had been much less coherent, which was one of the major reasons we lost the war between the states. But living under the boot of radicalism changed the South, and it changed America. The differences between the lowland and the upland South faded into the solid South of the Jim Crow era. White Northerners lost interest in pushing radical Reconstruction. The Yankee mind of the late 19th and early 20th centuries instead turned to imperialism and commercial progress. As hard as it is to believe, 8 years of living under President Barack Hussein Obama may have had a similar effect. That experiment seems to have cooled the enthusiasm, at least temporarily, of non-Southerners for social justice. Maybe it was all the Black Lives Matter rioting in the streets, but whatever the cause, a critical mass of white Northerners in rural areas started voting a lot more like rural white Southerners. And that changed the world. The racial and cultural gap between the coastal urbanites and the interior ruralites is what I got from TRS, is widened to such a degree that has become the primary polarity of American politics. I've occasionally written about this over the years. We have seen upper South states like Arkansas, Missouri, Kentucky, and West Virginia become much more Republican than they were when Bill Clinton was president. The same process has now moved across the Mason-Dixon line and into the Rust Belt in the Midwest, where my friend Matt Humbach lives. The left has demonized and written off the entire white working class in this country, and President Donald Trump is the result. Living through history. When Donald Trump began to steamroll over his Republican rivals during what was called at the time the Summer of Trump, I dropped everything else I was doing and started blogging about it. I sensed that something historic was unfolding in this country. I wanted to capture it and be a part of it. This was not because I had changed my convictions and become an American nationalist. As always, I remain a proud Southern nationalist. But there was a lot of exciting developments going on outside our little movement. Suddenly, the alt-right was rising like a sleeping giant that had wakened after a long slumber. I found this extremely fascinating because I'd come to Southern nationalism from the world of the alt-right in 2011. And I was around in 2008, 2009 when it started. The alt-right's focus on identity raised awareness of my Southern ethnic and cultural identity. So it was a natural progression from the alt-right's focus on identity to Southern identity. Unlike other Southern nationalists, I backed Trump to the end, voted for Trump in the primary and general election, and preferred a Trump victory. I was delighted when he won the presidency on November 8th. In my view, Trump was weakening mainstream conservatism, he was undermining taboos, he was polarizing the electorate, and he was mainstreaming a diluted form of populism and nationalism. He was having an impact like a Pat Buchanan or a Ron Paul, but on a vastly greater scale. He was actually won. Just from experience alone, I knew it would be down to our benefit. That's how I started out, as a Pat Buchanan guy. And all these people starting out as Trump supporters, they're going to move on. I mean, I saw Trumpism as a necessary stepping stone on a much longer journey. The Tea Party was another stepping stone. It looks like nothing more than silly mainstream conservatism in hindsight, but it too was part of a long-term process. The populist wing of the Tea Party moved to Breitbart and eventually pushed the right in a more nationalist direction. We need to be more historically conscious because one day President Trump will be gone. We will still be here, and something else, probably even more radical, will emerge as the successor of Trumpism. As with Jacksonian America, this moment too will pass sooner than we think. It is an episode, not the season finale. We've got to remain historically aware of where we're at in history and take a much longer view. Rise of the alt-right. 2015 and 2016 were breakout years for the alt-right. Southern nationalists have a lot to learn about from why and how that happened. The alt-right aggressively pushed itself into the national conversation, and by doing so reaped a windfall of publicity and converts. The alt-right was pragmatic, worked within the system to promote its own ends, and rallied behind President Donald Trump. Southern nationalists, many of whom we all know, who are convinced the system is hopelessly beyond reform and that they should have nothing to do with it, and were ideologically inflexible, and they sat on the sidelines while this just played out. The alt-right, through its links to Gamergate and the Manosphere, grasped the importance of memes, swarming social media, particularly Twitter, to discourse, poison, or push a narrative. The alt-right moved and planted its flag on Twitter and learned how to roll with the waves of the news cycle. In contrast, Southern nationalists retreated further into their own bubble and away from their audience. Southern nationalists were becoming more militant, more open to violence, more alienated, and thus more divided during the same period. This is last 2 years. The alt-right understood the appeal of being edgy, of having fun and smashing taboos to a younger audience. Southern nationalists were becoming more dour, pessimistic, and angry. Overall, they were in a really sour mood, And that had a very negative impact on our movement over the last 2 years. For the alt-right, the most striking development of 2016 was the rise of what we call the alt-light brands. I've been extremely critical on my website, altright.com, of some of these brands, many of whom I believe are financially motivated hucksters. But they are not without their virtues. We can still learn a lot from their success. First and foremost, there is Breitbart, which transformed the entire right and the whole American political spectrum, had a massive impact on the whole world, so I give them credit for that. There are also brands like Paul Joseph Watson and Mike Finovich, who amassed huge followings by skillfully exploiting social media to reach new audiences. There's a lot here that we ought to study and adapt for our own purposes. Southern nationalism has become a bit unglued. We haven't adapted to the Trump era yet. The movement is being pulled in different directions. Some want to move closer to our people, as they have moved closer to us under Trump, while others want to move further away. I'm here today to share with you a vision which I've named the Alternative South. This is actually a project which I've talked about with Michael Cushman many times over the years, and which never came to fruition. Strangely enough, we unconsciously began working on it many years ago. The Alt-South, as I envision it, isn't a membership organization. I actually got the idea from a blogger called Vox Day. He started arguing with me, and he's like, there's an alt-white and an alt-right and an alt-west or something. So I was like, why not there be an alt-south? So instead I would claim that. It is inspired by the relationship of white nationalism to the alt-right. Basically, the Alternative South would be a space for everyone in Dixie who is not some kind of leftist freak, Antifa or whatever, or a mainstream conservative. I have in mind people who are nationalists, populists, reactionaries, to come together and discuss our past, present, and common future without, like, you got to be a member of my organization, or you got to, like this or agree with me on that point. We have a broader thing. So the Atlanta Forum could become our annual gathering, similar to the role that the MPI conference plays with the alt-right. Instead of narrowing our influence and alienating people who are somewhat sympathetic, the idea here would be to reach out to all kinds of different right-wing tendencies, like my friend Matt Heimbach, as well as the average Trump supporters, and imbue them with the renewed sense of Southern national conscience, which Smithsonian was talking about. You have to have a Southern identity. We got to, be the Spartans, have the shield. Okay. And the Alt-South would be a ton of work. From our experience with the League of the South, we would love to continue the real-world meetups, the networking, the conferences, where people get to know each other in real life, and that you have social trust and bonds, which you just don't have on the internet. People don't know each other. It's really easy to have beefs that just flame out of control, and you saw what happened to TRS. We don't have to, there's no reason why these meetups and conferences have to be public. This is a private conference. We've had nothing but public conferences before. We don't have to host public demonstrations to take our movement offline. In fact, it would probably make a lot more sense to host several little small miniature private gatherings in major southern metro areas to get the movement started. We've already tested a model of this at the Augusta meetup, where Michael launched his book, and we had a little private get-together. And we could just go from Atlanta to Nashville to Richmond to St. Louis to Houston would be a good place, New Orleans, Little Rock. There's no reason why we couldn't host public events like the AmRen conference. James Edwards has suggested to me organizing another conference like the one we had in Memphis in late 2014. William, you were at that, so was Matt. I'm sure there are plenty of people who would love for us to do that and would volunteer to provide security. I was just talking to Matt about security outside a minute ago. Many of us have already gone public with our beliefs, and so there's no reason why those of us who are public or choose to be couldn't do a demonstration every now and then. And those were a really useful entry point for people who are interested in Southern nationalism, wanted to come out in the real world and meet people and get to know each other. And we have to learn from our mistakes, though, with that, and avoid doing too much at one time and getting really burned out about it and then just taking years off. We're also living in a very different era with the Trump administration being broadly sympathetic to many of our issues. For example, we did protests about refugee resettlement, and he just shut down refugees. We protested Obama's EPA restrictions or whatever on the coal industry, and Trump's completely changed that. We protested Marco Rubio for the comprehensive amnesty. Yeah. Well, that's dead. So there's just a lot. We were doing all these protests, and there's a lot of stuff that we did that it's just, we don't really need to protest it anymore. It's kind of a good thing. Yeah. There's no reason why we can't continue to publish very deconstructionist ebooks. I have in mind here Michael Cushman's Our Southern Nation and Paul Kersey's The Truth About Selma, which just came out. We need more books in this vein about a variety of subjects. And I highly recommend both of these books, and you can purchase them through I actually put it on the OD sidebar for you could just click right there and get it. And so we need more of that, and we need to build up our own canon and make it available to newcomers. And not only that, but if you go back through our history, and Michael can tell you about this, you can look at the 1850s and George Fitzhugh and Rhett and all these people that are very inspirational to us that most people haven't even heard of. It's just so obscure. And we need to publish a lot more material about things like that to educate people, to get them in kind of up to speed to where we're at. This probably sounds very familiar to you. It's what we've been doing for a number of years now. How would the Alt-South be any different from Southern nationalism? Specifically, we need to borrow the meme warfare and the swarming that I've seen the alt-right have so much success with. Now, I was shocked by the efficacy of trolling in 2016. I'm not a troll. And so, like, when I saw these trolls going after people on Twitter, and it's like, Jesus Christ, you know, they're getting $1 billion worth of free publicity, and we're sitting here raising this money to put up one billboard. And it's like, why aren't we doing that, you know? And, but sadly, the golden age of Twitter trolling is over. But we can still manage to use Twitter and other platforms like that without the aggression, without the targeting and the hard-edge racial language, you know, dropping the N-bomb and the J-bomb, whatever, that gets our social media accounts banned because they just want to get rid of us. So anything that you might remotely think is you're targeting someone, they'll use that as an excuse to ban your account. They just banned Matt. I saw that in the Washington Post. It's like, really? In the Washington Post because someone got banned from Twitter? But specifically, okay, the so-called the Draft Our Daughters hashtag. I don't know if y'all saw that. It was all these little memes, and it was Hillary wants to draft your daughters and send them to war to fight Russia, and that was great. That was something they couldn't really ban, you know, and it just proliferated all over Facebook and Twitter. And it was kind of moderate, you know, it went too hardcore, but it got through the bounds and it spread. And that's the kind of stuff that I have in mind that we need to do more to promote Southern nationalism. Okay. From the alt-right brands like Mike Finovich and Paul Joseph, there are many lessons to be learned. We need to look at Breitbart as a model of what we should be doing. We need to pool our resources together and organize as our own company and generate enormous, just tons of content and roll with the news cycle, cover what's in the news, and that way we can elbow our way into what's called the national conversation, which all these important people are talking about on Twitter. And that's what we're attempting to do right now with altright.com. I talked to Richard about that. We wanted a website that was more like BuzzFeed or Breitbart than arcane essays and stuff by people, philosophers you never heard of. And we need something that just circulates and spreads virally through social media. And one thing that we need to do, and I've been doing this on Occidental Dissent, is that we need to get into punditry. Because, you know, we've seen all these pundits, they write, and they were completely wrong about the election. So that's what I've been doing. I was like, you know what I'm going to do? For my website, I'm going to become like an alt-right pundit. And I'm just going to attack these people day after day. I'm going to attack like Rod Dreher and the conservatives at National Review, and that's what I'm doing. And we need more people doing that. We need like a whole army of pundits, kind of like townhall.com or something. And we need to build platforms, and we need to learn how to monetize our content. This is something that, you know, I joke around about, like Mike Cernovich and his books on juicing and what is it, baboon mindset or whatever. But he makes a lot of money. He makes a lot of money off that, and like, we need to do that too, and that would make us more financially independent. And we need to build more attractive websites to propagate a discourse about Southern ethnic and cultural identity, because that's just not even out there. We're not even talking about our collective culture, our collective, what unites us as people as a religion, blood, ethnicity, history. There's just nothing out there for that. And we need like a Breitbart style site that would do that. Perhaps the most important thing we need to do, I think, is mastering and building up our presence on social media platforms. Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, and I'm not any good with video, but I'll eventually learn how to do it. We'll get into Periscope, which is just a brilliant thing. I went to Selma the other day, and I had never even used it, and I walked over the bridge and just showing people, this is what it looks like. There's not a single business in downtown Selma. They just come and they do a photo op and they march over the bridge, and it's ridiculous. But imagine what we could do with Periscope. And I live in central Alabama, so I got all these ideas. And one thing that me and Paul Kersey are going to do from stuffblackpeopledon'tlike.com, we're going to go to Tuskegee, and we're going to present the reality of Tuskegee. We're going to start at the abandoned Walmart. You know, there's the home of the black entrepreneur. They can't even sustain Walmart. And then we're going to go look to George. It's a joke, and I'm going to call it George Washington Carver's house. And it's right in the middle of downtown Tuskegee, and like the trees are growing up around it, and it's been abandoned for like 30 years. This is right in the middle of town. It's like completely abandoned. It's like you go to Tuskegee, and it's this big symbol. It's a part of a narrative. And when people think of Tuskegee worldwide, they think of the pilots who single-handedly defeated the Nazis in World War II. the most important scientists in the world, and you know the epicenter of, you know, black business acumen. So it'd be fun to go to Tuskegee and just, this is how it like really looks. You don't ever see this on TV. And you do that with Periscope and all these Twitter and photos, and it's gonna be really fun when I do it. Let's see here. The Rebel Yell podcast, Masonius, is an excellent example of the content we ought to be producing. And Masonius was talking about how we need people to step up and just people producing more and more content. And that's what we really lack. We don't have enough people just doing their thing and putting it out there. And ideally, we'd have the means to distribute our content on blogs, podcasts, ebooks. I mean, we joke around about Cernovich's ebook, but we can make one about like the truth about Selma, the truth about Birmingham, the truth about Tuskegee, and just put it out there and sell it and let it go viral. And the alt-right brands now have the power to do this with a few tweets. Think you got an audience of like 200,000 people, and you put a tweet out there and it just explodes on Twitter. Everybody knows about it. It's in the news. And that's worth thinking about it. I wish we had someone who would just go out there and just would build up like 500,000 people following them on Twitter, and then they would just tweet like the Rebel Yell podcast or something I write on OccidentalDissent.com, and that's what would really blow it up and get it out there. Okay, we need to be far more, this is very serious, I'm talking to Michael here in Masonius. We need to be far more ambitious and serious about our writing and our podcasting. And the success of what happened with Brexit in the UK and President Trump and how that relates to the Breitbart thing should inspire us to believe that the future we want to achieve is possible. We need to really double down and get serious about writing and podcasting. We can't just kind of like drift from year to year like we do and, I'll update my blog one day, and we need to get on that. And we need to start looking for nationalist and populist candidates in state and local races in the South. The Southern equivalents of Paul Nealon that we can rally behind and support. And one thing that really boosted the alt-right is because we were all talking about Trump, and he was running for office, so the media wanted to talk about it. It became part of the story. And if we had, like, say, someone running against Lindsey Graham in South Carolina, and the whole alt-right was supporting him, cheering him on, it would become a big deal at the state level, and it would get attention. It would attract people, get our name ID out there. So in such a way, we can blend the elements of the Southern nationalism and the alt-right into like an alternative South thing. And we'll take the strengths from both and try to minimize the weaknesses. Now, just watch what I'm doing at Occidental Dissent, because I'm already in the process of implementing everything I've said here and more, which means I'm going on Twitter every day and I'm like, follow, because I'm going to like be like Cernovich and Paul Joseph Watson, where I can have like the 100,000 followers and just tweet it out. I haven't spelled everything out I'm doing, but many of you have no doubt noticed the recent changes. I completely redesigned my site. We have altright.com, very attractive thing, and lots of people cooperating with that. And I'm confident that Occidental Dissent will soon become a platform of the Alt-South and will explode and reach to go to never-before-seen heights. Now, Southern nationalism will thrive during the Trump years as we organize and build bridges with Dixie's deplorables. I interact with these people all day on Twitter. They tweet at me. Just regular Trump supporter, deplorable this, deplorable that, who's in somewhere in Florida or something. Send me emails, and these are Trump's base, and they love me. They interact with me all the time. I sent out a tweet like 2 days ago, and it's like got over 1,000 likes, and it's got like 900 retweets. It's just taking off. And that could be bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, and it just spread. Things are not nearly as bad as so many believe. A lot of people in the League of the South will say, Trump's won. You know, we're all America again. We're going to go back to sleep and, you know, make America great again. But it's not nearly that bad. Southerners aren't going back to sleep. They've edged much closer to our way of thinking, actually. And the polarization that we're seeing under Trump is going to reach never-before-seen heights as what's called the resistance begins in earnest. You've probably seen these people. They dress up in little vagina hats and they're pretending to be dead. And this insanity, we didn't even anticipate this kind of insanity like 2 months ago. We've only been like a week, 2 weeks. So this is going to be great. We're going to live through this, the Trump years. We're going to prosper, and we're going to come out the other side of it like our Southern nationalist forebears in Jackson and Polk's America. You know, we had the age of Jackson. And then, like, what happened is that it was very polarizing. That's when you had that second anti-slavery movement got started. And see, eventually Trump's going to be gone. And eventually all these people who are doing all this crazy stuff out in the streets, they're going to be back in charge. And they're going to be crazier and more radical than ever before. And like I said, you know, this is not yet our time, but we are closer to it than ever before. So thank you. So giving you something to think about, and have a nice day. Dio Bendiz. League of the South presents you my great friend, Michael O. Cushman.
Thank you. So I'm back up here. Thanks, Brad. Thanks for everybody for coming. I just want to say I think this was a really successful first Atlanta forum, and I hope just the first of many. I would like to see this become an institution. And so this is, I've kind of tailored my presentation for the new people, for people who are interested in the alt-right, who came from that direction, but now they're being exposed to Southern nationalism. And so that's my message, who it's tailored for today. And I just want to say, in the wake of the awful Dylann Roof shootings and the assault on the Confederate flags and monuments that RG talked about a little earlier, by Republicans and Democratic leaders alike, a grassroots resistance was born. And that was the summer of 2015. Hundreds of people gathered for a pro-Confederate flag rally in Waxahachie, Florida. 1,000 people rallied in Montgomery, Alabama for the Confederate flag that summer. 4,000 people rallied for a Graham, North Carolina Confederate statue. Graham, North Carolina. 4,000 people. Hundreds joined Confederate flags parades in central and northern Arkansas, rural Georgia, and elsewhere. Now, by the end of July of the summer of 2015, the Huffington Post, a far-left, anti-white website, conservatively estimated that there had been 132 pro-Confederate flag rallies that summer, and more continued into the fall. And that was since that senseless shooting that our enemies so took advantage of. We lost a lot of political fights that summer and in the months that followed. A lot of fights over our symbols, which stung really badly. Like, for example, the flag that flew in front of the South Carolina Capitol. Now, I remember when we were fighting over the battle flag flying above the South Carolina Capitol. I remember skipping school days when I was in high school and driving up to Columbia just to walk around that Capitol and look up there above me at the Confederate flag and just being really inspired, just knowing I was on hallowed ground. And we fought really hard to keep that flag up there. We lost that fight. They moved it to the monument in front of the Capitol. We fought hard to keep it there, and we lost that fight. So some of those fights, some of us had a lot of skin in the game, and that really hurt. But we won a lot of fights in the summer of 2015 too. And especially in areas where we tended to dominate demographically. And we did so with absolutely, this is important, we did so with absolutely no support from the cucked leadership of the Republican Party. In every state, Alabama, Georgia, South Carolina, Florida, in every state, the leadership of the GOP abandoned us. And we are the base of the GOP. White Southerners are the base of the Republican Party. And they stabbed us in the back on this issue in every southern state. Republican support for the Confederate flag nationally, not just in the South at that time, was 78%. And all of these southern governors abandoned us. That was actually up from 75% in 1992. Support had increased among Republicans from 1992 to 2015. And as my friend Brad pointed out, this sudden antipathy for our symbols came not from a change in public opinion. It came from somewhere else. Our leaders betrayed us. And that's what it came down to. I also want to emphasize that the rising of 2015, and that is the way I look at it, it was a grassroots rising. It was not a U.S. conservative movement. It was something else. It was an ethno-national political uprising of the people. And those who don't recognize it as such, just they aren't looking closely enough. Then this past year, we had a politically incorrect billionaire who campaigned on deporting millions of illegal immigrants, building a border wall, completely halting Muslim immigration, and tearing down the liberal media's monopoly. He swept to victory over all of these traitorous Republicans from the South who had stabbed us in the back. I got to tell you, that felt good. That felt good. I voted for the first time in a long time for him for that reason. Conservatives such as, and feel free to boo when I read these names, conservatives such as Lindsey Graham.
Boo with a lisp.
Yeah. Marco Rubio. But these were the kind of people that were defeated by Donald Trump. Now, I should also say, I forgot one number. 90%, if you think about it, 90% of white Southerners at that time supported the Confederate flag, according to opinion polls. 90%. And we couldn't get our leaders to support us on that. It's no wonder that somebody like Trump came along and won. These people who had sided against us, who had sided with the NAACP and the SPLC, I'll just name a few more. How about Jeb Bush? How about Rand Paul? Who insisted that a statue of our president, Jefferson Davis, come down. It was too divisive for Rand Paul. Too divisive. These men were openly mocked and trounced in the Republican primary. And I thought it was a fantastic thing to behold. I still enjoy going on YouTube and watching those old debates where these guys just get tore to pieces. I love that. All the leading Republicans who had refused to stand up for the culture and the heritage of their Southern voters were pushed aside. Every one of them. It was a beautiful thing to witness. I should probably add, believe me, it was beautiful. Trump was widely celebrated for winning a small minority of white voters in several Rust Belt states, which put him over the top against Hillary Clinton. And this is an accomplishment which should not be sneered upon, to be honest. In fact, I celebrated this, and I publicly congratulated the people of these northern states. Trump won states that Republicans had not won in quite a long time by repudiating the wars of the neocons and the free trade policies of the libertarians. That's how he won. This was impressive. But in the South, Trump won super majorities of the white vote, overcoming a built-in demographic advantage for the Democrats with large black populations in all these lower South states. Remember that Alabama is only 68% white, but Trump won 62% of the vote in Alabama. Mississippi is only 59% white. Trump won 58% of the vote. Meanwhile, Michigan's 76% white. Trump barely edged out Hillary with just 47% of the vote. Now, I'm glad that Trump won Michigan. We had to have it, right? I'm glad he won. Don't get me wrong, but roughly half of the white voters there cast their ballot for Hillary. Something's wrong there. The same cannot be said of any southern state. Not one. Pennsylvania is 79% white. Pennsylvania. But Trump narrowly beat Hillary with 48% of the vote. He didn't even get a majority. Remember, Mississippi's 59%. He won 58% of that vote. This is the takeaway, like I said, nothing from the right-wingers or Trump voters of the North or West. But Trump won, and indeed, this is my point, the right wing exists as a still viable political force in the USA only because of the remarkable solidarity of our people. That's it. That's the only reason that there is a right wing in the USA today. So what I'm saying is that here in Dixie, we already have the best people. Trump talks about the best people. We've got the best people. We've got the best people. This is all the more remarkable when you consider that for the last several generations, we've been purposely miseducated in our public schools to believe that Southerners are uniquely evil in all of history for the supposed sins of slavery and segregation, when in fact, that's the norm throughout human history. We've been beaten down by a never-ending onslaught from anti-Southern propaganda in the U.S. media, in Hollywood. And when I say that word Hollywood, I need Sven to hit that little echo button there. And from U.S. leaders, when Hollywood movie writers dream up a script, if the bad guy's not a German or a Russian, then you can probably bet that he's a Southerner, and quite often you'll be right. Our solidarity is also remarkable when you consider that millions of third world immigrants have been allowed to settle and vote in Florida, Texas, Virginia, Georgia, and the Carolinas, repopulating vast regions of our state that a short time ago, within my lifetime, were homogeneously European and African. So as an introduction to Southern nationalism, I just want to point out that Southerners are a unique ethnic group in the USA. And if it were not for us, the United States would be a hard left social democracy. It'd be like Sweden. If not for us, the USA would be a one-party state. Democrats would rule this place uncontested, if not for Southerners. And importantly, if this is key here, if demographics trends continue, we all know what's going to happen. In the near future, our Southern solidarity, remarkable that it still exists, it'll be overcome by sheer numbers. That's the sad fact. The white liberal minority, much of which comes from transplants living in the South, combined with many millions of third world immigrants and our homegrown black population, which was enfranchised by the North, will simply be too much for us to defeat at the ballot box. This is the future that looms without major political and demographic change. We've seen political change. It's going to take demographic change to halt that future. I also want to say that there's a few things about why we are a unique ethno-cultural group. And here are some red pills that the alt-right likes to term red pills. First, the Southern civilization is the defeated but still surviving remnant of a once larger, much bigger, much prosperous, older, wealthier civilization that once stretched from the Chesapeake Bay down to Brazil. And our political values, our natural conservatism, our racial attitudes, our hostility to equality, our skepticism towards mass democracy, that was all born out of the plantation civilization that was once the wealthiest place in the world. And you will never hear me counter-signal the plantation or that civilization that once existed, because that's where we get our values. That's why we're still here and unique. That's why the United States is not a left-wing one-party state. This is the golden circle narrative. If you listen to me very much, then you'll have heard that term. I read a book about it. It's almost universally agreed upon by those who study this, by mainstream academics, but sadly poorly understood by Southerners. And that's why I wrote Our Southern Nation, Its Origin and Future. Our style of politics is natural to who and what we are, but it's unnatural to the bourgeois metropolitan world of the East and West Coast. It's very unnatural for them. From their point of view, we're a very strange creature here. But from our point of view, this is natural. This is who we are. That civilization, unfortunately, was destroyed in revolutionary violence and political chaos. And now the liberal, universalist values of the bourgeois metropolitan world, they're the norm, and we're the exception. So history has really been turned upside down. Now, speaking directly to those who identify with or are curious about the rising alt-right, the Old South was red-pilled on every single issue you hold dear. Every single one. We understood the dangers of mass democracy and universal suffrage. All you have to do is read Southern writers from before pretty recently, and they were all in agreement that universal suffrage and mass democracy were terrible things that had to be avoided at all costs. We appreciated the natural and positive differences between the sexes, and elevated each one in their own natural sphere. We got the racial question probably better than anybody else on this planet, I would say, and tried to handle it, given our circumstances, in the most humane and productive and Christian way possible, while ensuring that we remained a land for ourselves and our posterity. We frowned upon radical religious sects which threatened the unity of our faith and civilization. We understood the urbanite problem. If you follow TRS Confederates or now Identity Dixie, you know the phrase, crush the urbanite. Hey, we got that one right. The center of our civilization was not our cities, it was our small farms and our plantations. Gun control in the low country of South Carolina meant mandating by law that all white men had to be armed at all time, even in church. That's what gun control meant then. When other European plantation civilizations came under attack, we gave them refuge. When the French people of what's now Haiti, which had been a wonderful, wealthy little culture there, very productive. It had been wealthier than all the mainland colonies combined. When that place was destroyed in Black Revolution, Marxist revolution, racial revolution that was inspired by the French Revolution, we gave them refuge. We took in those French refugees. And when we were destroyed by the Union, Brazil, which was the last surviving plantation country at that time, the Empire of Brazil, gave thousands of Southerners refuge. And there's even today a surviving Confederate population in Brazil. And that made sense. That made sense. We celebrated connections to the soul and past generations of our people. Let's see. When I already said that part. I also want to point out that Southern nationalism arose long before the war between the states. A little bit ago, we had a question, and we gave out a prize about the Bluffton boys, but Southern nationalism goes way back. It's not just about Robert E. Lee. In the late 1820s, 3 decades before Lincoln was elected and prior to the rise of prominence of the slavery issue, Robert Barnwell Brett, who's the father of Southern nationalism, that would have made a great trivia question, he campaigned throughout the South for secession and Southern unity. So this was a South Carolina statesman who went on to become a U.S. Senator and a Confederate congressman. And he declared in the late 1820s that the United States was a failed experiment in combining different types of people together under the same government. And I'd have to agree with him. He was proven right by history. Over 500,000 people were killed. He rejected the Union the way it was because of multiculturalism, even though that wasn't a term that was common back then, but that's exactly what he described. And that was at the time when the U.S. government was 100% white. 100% white. And the thought of having a non-white president or non-white senators, I mean, nobody would have been able to conceive of that. And already he had rejected the U.S. as a failed experiment in multiculturalism. Even after we lost our war for independence, we fought a guerrilla war against occupying Union troops and northern-backed black militias to win back home rule and Southern control of our state governments. We won the peace, and we erected countless monuments throughout the South dedicated to the glory of our fallen heroes. Pretty much where I'm from, every county courthouse has a statue of a Confederate soldier in front of it. Every one of them. Even in counties that are vastly majority black. Even there. Now today it seems like we've lost everything. That's the way it can seem when you read the news. People vote, our people, even in this environment, still vote unlike white people anywhere else in the United States. In the rural lower South, we vote 90% in solidarity, Southerners. The same levels basically that blacks vote in solidarity. So that can't be said of whites elsewhere in the United States. You just don't find that. We're the most religious region in the United States. There's a reason that we're called the Bible Belt, and we take pride in that. People are actually proud of that. You know, in New York they say it as a term of derision, but people here are actually proud of it. We're the most right-wing region, and we're the only region with its own world-renowned flag. And we're also a potential powerful bloc. The alt-right has many Southerners in its ranks. You've met some of them today. Some you haven't. There's a lot more. There's no way of telling, but I would guess that at least half of the people on the alt-right, or those on the genuine right in general, in the United States are probably from the South. I would guess that that's the case. Nowhere else have you seen the kind of activism that you've seen here. Now, Brad's talked about it, RG's talked about it. We've been doing this for years. There's just at a drop of a hat. If a monument comes under attack, if a flag comes under attack, you can pretty much count that somebody in that community, oftentimes someone with no political experience, who's never run for office, never done anything public, will stand up and say, hey, that's wrong. You can't take down that flag. That's my great-great-great-granddaddy's flag. And there will be some uproar about it. Now, I certainly cheer when a handful of patriots take a public stand in San Francisco or Chicago or New York. But honestly, ordinary people here do that sort of thing on a regular basis, a lot more frequently. And there's absolutely nothing that I want to say. This is taking absolutely nothing away from nationalists elsewhere. But imagine for just a second that 4,000 nationalists gather in rural Italy or rural Scotland or rural Massachusetts or Oregon, waving flags that are labeled by the media as right-wing and pro-white, and demand that a monument honoring soldiers who fought for an explicitly pro-white government, that be protected. Like, imagine that. It's almost impossible to imagine it happening elsewhere. But it happened last year in rural North Carolina. And similar events happened in rural Florida, in Alabama, only in Dixie. We cheered on Trump's most hardcore speeches. When the Donald got in trouble elsewhere, and I thought this was a mistake during his campaign. When he got in trouble with the media, what did he do? He always came back to the South and gave a hardcore speech. And I thought at the time, I'm like, oh no, you're killing yourself. You're killing yourself. You know, you should be in those swing states with a more toned down message. No, that's not what he did. He came back to the South and gave a hardcore speech. He went down to Alabama and he told the practically all white Southern audience there that they were the people who built America. That's what he told them. You remember that, Brad? You were there. You know, watch that video on YouTube. That's a great video. He went to South Carolina and he mocked the powerful Bush family. Totally belittled him in public on stage, just made a fool out of them, attacked their stupid wars, and defeated their favorite son. He went to Florida and condemned the international banks. Where are those echoes again? And the global special interest in speeches that were condemned by the SPLC and the ADL as anti-Semitic. Wonder why they felt that attack personally, huh? Dixie made Trump great time and time again. And I want to say too that the future of the right wing, the alt-right, Western mankind, Christendom, everything that we hold dear really depends upon developments right here in the South, the way I look at it. We're sometimes banched by fellow alt-righters, and that's okay. On some of the other podcasts, they make little jokes about us. That's okay. We can take a joke. But let's not fool ourselves. Half of the U.S. military and most of the people who are well-trained or experienced with firearms in the USA, the only surviving Western stock really from the colonial era, the people who make the right wing possible, the only people really who can make North America great again, that's us. That's us. Through His infinite wisdom, God allowed our people to take these lands, to conquer them, to hold them, the Appalachian Mountains, the Mississippi Delta, the Texas Hill Country, the Sand Hills and Low Country of Carolina, the Piedmont, the dark rivers of Florida, the fertile Chesapeake Bay, and many more. Our people, our tribe, they took these lands and they instituted laws and customs to ensure that we survived, that this was our land for the future. But our future's in doubt now. An alien power dictates laws to us. Not a single member of the U.S. Supreme Court is a white Southern Protestant. Not a single member. We've come all too familiar with losing in recent years. We expected it. I expected to lose the last election. I hadn't voted in forever before that. What was the point? We presume naturally that things will just get worse and worse over time, I think. But now we've had a taste of victory now. And we like it. We like to win. And, you see a renewed confidence on people, on their face. And it's addictive, this taste of victory. We've got a new swagger. We've got allies all over the place that are rising to power. They fly our flags on the streets in Hungary. Heimbach can tell you that. He's been there and seen it. On the streets of Germany and in Ulster in protest quite often, instead of flying flags that have been banned, they'll fly our flag. It's a universal, among Western people at least, symbol of a defiance. And in Russia, we have a pro-Western, pro-Christian ally. May not be perfect, but a good ally, I think. We have such allies rising to power throughout Eastern Europe and potentially this year in a lot of places in Western Europe. Even in Asia, outside the Western world, we have potential allies, like in the Philippines, for example. You gotta love that fella. In various regions of South America, we also have millions of people. We tend to write off this South America in general. Millions of people just like us, come from similar, not just like us, but have similar backgrounds and are going through similar struggles. So I just want to say that all is not lost. I actually think that our movement is on the rise. People who are friendly to our cause are on the rise. We've got somebody in the White House who cares about a lot of the same issues that we care about. And I want to say that the future really is what we make of it. And this was a kind of an introduction to Southern nationalism for people who come from the alt-right, who are interested in the alt-right. I want to close by saying that Robert Baumel Rhett, he was my personal hero and the father of Southern nationalism. He once condemned the Confederate States government for not being pro-Southern enough. He used the term Southernism. He said that his belief in Southernism was too strong for the Confederate government, and claimed that it was oppressing him. The mainstream conservatives there were too cooked, too cooked. But after we lost, he predicted that within a generation that our people would have more children, We would rebuild the South. He just viewed us as a naturally superior people, and he thought that we was for sure that we were going to rise up and win again. And he died with that assurance in 1876, the year that the red shirts rose up in South Carolina and threw off an occupational government and handed power from that left-wing anti-white government to Wade Hampton, today known as the savior of South Carolina. He talked about, Rhett talked about uncompromising Southernism, or we could say today Dixieism. But that spirit of Rhett, that'll make us strong. We need to cultivate that. So this is our first Atlanta Forum. Thank y'all for coming. We want to make this an institution which can set the tone and provide the leadership, intellectual leadership, the activist leadership for Southern nationalism in the 21st century. And with your help, we can accomplish this and a lot more. So I just want to say God bless you and God bless Dixie.
Hello, everybody. It's a great honor to be here and to talk with y'all. Thank you, Mr. Cushman. I think we owe a debt of thanks to Cushman. I can tell you, having put on a few small things myself, I used to work with the Optimist clubs in Georgia, and I helped put on my first thing I put on was a state Optimist club convention. And people who come to these meetings have no idea how much work goes into the meeting. It looks real easy. You just show up and you go in, and you get your cup of coffee and sit down, and the speakers. This meeting probably represents, when you tell me if I'm wrong, Cushman, probably 400 emails, 50 or 60 letters, 200 telephone calls, 15 arguments, 300 decisions. So anyway, let's give a hand to Cushman. And to the other speakers, it's nice to be here with Brad again. He was a great help to me about a year ago when I needed him to go find a missing heir. And he left his town, Alabama, and drove over and found the missing heir. And I'm very grateful for that. And, the other speakers, I've heard Mr. Miller before, and so on. And I'm grateful to all of you. This is quite a sacrifice. You're entitled to feel good about yourself. I grew up as the child of a very, very stern set of Presbyterians, and they were very concerned that we might have swollen heads, and they did not believe in, what do they call it, high self-esteem training. they believed in humility training. And so I'm happy with that heritage. I'm still a Presbyterian, although I'm not entirely on board. And I think overall that upbringing did me good, and I don't hate my parents. And unlike a lot of people, I was saying today, I hear people say that their kids tell them things like, I hate you, I wish you were dead. My father was not really a great parent. He had real problems. He was really hard on us. And there were times when I was furious and would leave the dinner table and go to my bedroom and slam the door and grind my teeth and pout. But never, ever did I say, even to myself about my father, I hate you and I wish you were dead. I'm glad I will go to my predestined award without having that on my conscience of ever having said something like that. I don't know how people can say that about their progenitors. But I've been at this a long time, and I'm so happy to see you people here. It is a big sacrifice to come here, and you're entitled, I was going to say, unlike what we were taught in the Presbyterian Church, you're entitled to feel good about yourselves. I give you, by whatever authority invested in me, I pronounce your absolution. For today, you're allowed to feel good about being here because you are the elite of our race. You may not have the highest IQ, the biggest bank accounts. You may not have a title that's been handed down to you by your ancestors. But you are the cutting point of our race. It's little meetings like this where the future of our race is being decided. We are in the very infancy of this matter. We're in the very earliest stages of what will be a very, very long journey, and a journey with the ultimate goal and arrival point of which is unpredictable. We cannot predict where it will go. We can't predict, assuming that our race survives, and I think it will, and that it not merely survives, but triumphs and becomes once more the master of its own destiny. We can't imagine what kind of society will exist when all of this is over and done with. I have never been a Southern nationalist. I'm not a Southern nationalist today. Nevertheless, I have been very friendly to the League of the South and have been a member of the League of the South because I welcome anything that refreshes and informs the American political system situation. Most Americans, and especially when I was growing up, are simply the living dead. Their idea of politics was it was something that took place every 2 years between Democrats and Republicans. You had two parties. The fact that the parties were basically the same and owned by the same people didn't register on them. And that was it. They were not like our principal adversary. You know, we struggle for control of this turf here in North America. This is our field to work. We wish people in the old country well, the old world well. We're happy about Austrian elections, and we certainly should help them if we ever can. But this is our field. Home. Home is where you live, and this is our field. The Southern nationalism is a way of getting things going, of introducing a somewhat radical idea to large numbers of people, which has an historical precedent. The idea that at the end of some sort of Southern secession, we would end up with what most people have in mind is laughable. It's not going to happen that way, any more than when the weakling Stuart King, Charles I, entertained delusions that he was going to create a divine right monarchy and repeal 9 or 10 centuries of stated English common law, and he was going to be like his cousin Louis XIV, and he was going to rule by divine right. And a lot of Englishmen didn't agree with that, and they took up arms against him in the English Civil War. And Parliament, finally he had to call Parliament, and Parliament wouldn't give him any money, and the English Civil War broke out. At that point, there actually, what each side saw coming in the future was not that far apart. The parliamentarians did not want to kill the king. They didn't want a Republican, non-monarchical England. They just wanted a king who would accept the fact that he was under the law and would stop violating the traditional customs of English law. By the same token, the people, the Cavaliers who were around the king, they did not see themselves as fighting to institute the kind of divine right monarchy that had existed in Paris under Louis XIV. But by the end of many years, that struggle went on for 10 years, and then it ended. By the time it ended, the king was dead. They'd had to behead the king. The country was in the grips of a military dictator whose powers were greater than Louis XIV. They had created an autocracy that was greater than that of Louis XIV. And I'm sure there are probably only 5 people here who are interested in English history. It's worth knowing, since it is basically our history, that the child is father to the child is the father of the man. And we, to a great extent, are shaped unknowingly about what happened then. But nobody in 1642, when the king rode out of London and summoned his loyalists to go to war with Parliament, no one would have ever dreamed that it would end up the way it did. And there's no way for us to predict where all of this is going to go. America, there is nothing that really binds America together. You all have heard the extract from the wonderful poem that I commend to you by Sir Walter Scott, The Lay of the Last Minstrel. What you've heard from that concluding part of that poem are the famous words that they even had a movie about it when I was a child and played it in school. they call it a man without a country. Breathes there a man with soul so dead, who never to himself hath said, this is my own, my native land. And then it goes on, whose heart hath ne'er within him warmed, as homeward his wandering footsteps turned. And it goes on to say that if there is such a man who's never had an affinity for home and country, then he is damned. And we talked about the Melian Ephialtes a few minutes ago, the traitor who led the Persians around Leonidas and the Spartans. The betrayal of your own is a shocking thing. To assist for a Greek to do that is shocking. It was shocking that we had spies in America who betrayed us to the Soviets. Most of them, thank goodness, were not us. They were Jews. That's simply a matter of, if that upsets anybody, I'm sorry. It's simply the truth. It's a matter of historical fact that the Atom spies were all Jews. And were disloyal to this country. And many people think that Jews are disloyal to this country today and will never be loyal. And certainly the Atom spies argue for that. You here in this room are healthy. You still feel an affinity for what you are and for other people. You're not loners. You're not libertarians wanting to create your own individual country. The libertarians actually put that stuff out. You'll get a little piece of paper and you'll be your own country. And something that I quoted from the ancient Greeks earlier. One man, no man. That's what the Greeks said. You are only a human being in companionship with other human beings. You cannot be a loner. You have to be part of a pack. And this is one of the fundamental problems with America, is that we are entirely too individualistic. We are way too individualistic. And this hobbles us in our struggle now for racial survival. You have to be a group. Your mother tongue is imposed upon you by your mother in a completely fascistic way. Your opinion is not asked about whether this is yellow or żółty, as it is in Russian. The baby doesn't say, no, that's not yellow, that's żółty. The baby learns exactly what the mother tells the baby, and there is no choice. And if you allowed everybody to make up his own language, which I guess is the ultimate extension of libertarianism, no one would be able to talk to each other. There'd be no communications, because everybody would have his own word for things. So you're healthy. Most of you are intelligent. I don't know most of you, but you seem intelligent. You seem well-dressed. You're here listening attentively to speeches that have been well-crafted with subject-verb sentences. The average person your age, and even my age now, can't handle that kind of thing. Their attention spans are too short. And you've come here at some considerable risk to your personal life because of your loyalty to who you are. Now, our conceptions of who we are very important. Our definition of who we are is very important. We have to define ourselves. And I spoke with one of the previous speakers because I was concerned that the remarks that I had prepared today would be misinterpreted as an attack. I'm not here to attack. I'm not here to correct or to contradict. I'm just here as what you are, a white, Anglo-Saxon, mostly Southerner with 2 New England grandmothers. I'm here just to chat with you, because, like I said, we don't know where all this is going, and most of this is practical stuff. It's very practical stuff, and we must be led by practical decisions rather than theory. I'm very suspicious of theory as I read the history of the last few centuries. This is a little bit of a digression, but not much. There was one papist. Are there any Roman Catholics here? I'm sure there's some. But I like to tease people. I was teased mercilessly by my father, and it created an ugly trait in me that I like to tease people. So if there are Roman Catholics here, I mean you know ill when I call you papist. But there was one papist There was one papist in the Constitutional Convention, Carroll of Maryland, from the family from which you get the phrase in Maryland, my Maryland, remember Carroll's sacred trust. I don't think that was that Carroll. I think it was an ancestor of that Carroll. But he wrote something that I read. I thought, this is very good. He said, I sought to achieve something what I and others sought to achieve here was born of experience and not of theory. And it's in stark contrast to the Declaration of Independence. Abraham Lincoln recognized that quite clearly. He was not dumb. He was evil, but he was not dumb. On his way to take his oath of office in Washington, he stopped off in Pennsylvania. He went around visiting what were called the war governors, undoubtedly sitting down and planning with them the fact that he was going to provoke a war and lead a war of conquest against the South, which at that point probably the majority of people didn't really want. And so while he was there, he went and he made a speech in Independence Hall, and he alluded to the difference between the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence. The Declaration of Independence is just nonsense. I'm sorry if people, you have some kind of a totem reverence for it. It's just the windiest bunch of nonsense that you can imagine. All men are created equal. Is there anyone in this room who's the same height as anyone else? You know, no man, even identical twins, no man, the truth is, no man ever at any time has been or ever will be created equal. There's nothing in life that is equal. And then it goes on, and is endowed by his Creator with certain inalienable rights. That's not true either. The people how many inalienable rights do the people of Tibet have today? None, because they can be alienated. When Mao Zedong shows up with a machine gun and his equivalent, the Antifa, and tells you to shut down the Buddhist temple, yes, your right can be. It is very much alienable. It is alienated. People have only such rights as they create for themselves out of their people's historic experience. Our Bill of Rights was taken from a template, a previous computer copy called the Declaration of Right, that the English Parliament passed in 1692, when the last of these power-drunk Stuart kings was driven out of England. It's called the Declaration of Right. And you go through it. Right to a lawyer. Every man's home is his castle. King cannot come into the home without a warrant. Just bingo, 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 bingo. It's virtually, it's 85%. These rights of an Englishman, which is what we originally fought for in the Revolution before this insanity that we were fighting for the rights of man crept in, the rights of Englishmen were capable of definition. Habeas corpus, right to be in your house, secure from a search warrant, right to a jury trial. All these things came out of the Anglo-Saxon experience. They didn't exist in the Russian experience or the Greek experience. They existed in our Anglo-Saxon experience. And they were capable of definition. You knew what they were. And our ethno-state, our future utopia, and call it various names. I've been looking for a name of our future utopia. Aryavarta might work, except it's too hyper-Indo-European. Aryavarta was the ancestral legendary homeland of the Aryans, so we could call it, when we create Aryavarta, or the New Jerusalem would appeal to some people, the New Jerusalem. We don't know quite what this is going to be, and we're far from it. I will be long gone to my predestined mansion before these things are settled. I would sure love to see it, but I won't see it. Some of you will probably live to see it. But we don't know what it's going to be like. Like the Puritans and Roundheads had no idea where the English Civil War was heading. And we will have to feel our way. Like St. Paul said, we see through the glass darkly as to what it's going to be. I love Proverbs, and there's an old English proverb, most of you have heard it, that in the winter, the farmer looks to his tools. Which means when there's no action out there, you can't be planting the crops, you go to the barn and you repair the tools, you clean the barn, You sort the seed out. You get ready. And we're in the winter now. We're not engaged in practical politics. Trump is not going to, I can tell you right now, Trump is going to drop all of us so fast it's going to make your head swim. Nothing. With Kushner in there running the White House, please. I mean, how many thousands of years of experience does it take to figure out where Kushner is going? Please grow up and understand what this means. But we are in the winter. We're not, it's impossible for us to get elected to the Senate or governor. It's been impossible for a long time, and it's becoming more and more impossible. But breaking out of the rigid, narrow American paradigm of elections and Democrat versus Republican, the fact that we can't win an election does not mean the end for us. We have a weak sense of nationhood in this country because we came from so many places, and we came here as individualists, and we never had the opportunity to really cohese together as a nation. Other nations aren't like that. When the Soviet Union collapsed, little Latvia on the Baltic Sea was 48% non-Latvian. The Latvian 52 wanted their own country. The 48% non-Latvian wanted to stay with Russia. Well, the Latvians didn't do what many of our people are tempted to do. They say, oh, we're only 52%, and we're a little country with only 2 million people, so I guess we'll just have to go extinct and cease to be Latvian. No. They got out of bed when they saw the red flag come down and you could finally go out and safely in public. The Latvians got out of bed that morning and the guys put their pants on. They said, we're going to wear the pants from now on. There's going to be a Latvia. And by George, there is a Latvia. It may have a big non-Latvian minority, but there is a Latvia, and their language and their peculiar little special Christian religion, all that's going to be protected. There are 200 million white people in America. It is completely unlikely that 100 million British Americans and 100 million white Americans of kindred sorts are just going to walk off the stage of history because they get outvoted by the colonizers. When the sociopathic trash that rules us finally import enough colonizers where they can have enough helots to take over people, you can't predict where this is going. They're predicting, in their minds, they have this prediction. They're going to have this country. They're going to have the whites outnumbered. You're going to have a bunch of people like Barbara Streisand up there in New York, and they're going to be running the country, and they're going to be making fun of us, and they're going to be grinding out even more movies to make fun of us, of our religion, of our accents, and demonizing us, and they just have all this money, and they have all this power. They'll have the power just to walk down the sidewalk and say, I don't like that one, his eyes are too blue, bang. They see this. I don't think it's going to turn out that way. And I think the destiny of a tiny minority of people who are paranoid megalomaniacs, and who will not leave other people alone, I don't think this story is going to end well for them. I'm sorry it's not going to end well for them. I wish this problem didn't exist, but it ain't going to end well for them. They're not going to let it end well. And in that sense, our enemies are our greatest strength. Our enemies will grind and polish us and make us into the kind of people we ought to be because they cannot control themselves. Well, T.S. Eliot said, well, let me back up a minute. I have taproots into the times of antiquity and paganism. I'm not a pagan, but that's important to me. The Greeks had 7 sayings that were inscribed on the altar of Apollo at Delphi. They went around ancient Greece, and they went to what they called the 7 wise men of Greece, and got a maxim from each one. And they inscribed this on the altar to Apollo. I don't know them all. I can only remember 3 of them. Know thyself is one of them. That'd be the one you know best. And the one that's most relevant here. There's another very good one that will help you in business and life, and that is, the perfect is the enemy of the good, which means if you try to be a perfectionist, you won't produce what you ought to, that you accept the good and you don't try to make it perfect. But on that altar was written, know thyself, or actually it's better translated, know who you are. Knowing who you are is a much bigger thing than know thyself. Knowing who you are, it's much more than just looking inside yourself and psychoanalyzing yourself and this kind of. Knowing who you are means knowing where you fit in, what sex you are, what race you are, what line of work you're in, where you fit into society, where your ancestors came from. Know who you are is a very different thing from know thyself. And we have to know who we are. And that will help us grasp our way towards our future utopia, our ethno-state. So we have to, during this winter, when we're looking to our tools, we need to be thinking through what is our future state going to look like? What is it going to be like? You know, there are a lot of options. And everything's on the table for discussion. And what kind of religion, what kind of money system, what kind of social system. I would say that one thing we know, and that is, it must not be a universal suffrage democracy. Now, that we know from experience. A universal suffrage democracy, I have many bad people in my ancestry. I have a few prominent ones. My great-great-grandfather was named Benjamin Dixon. I'm very proud. He was in the State House of Representatives in South Carolina. He was one of the 5 people who fought hardest against Jacksonian democracy in opposing the expansion of the franchise. And I have a cousin who has apostatized Roman Catholicism and is actually a priest. I had never met him, but when I met him, he mentioned this incident, and he said, "Are you aware of this?" And I said, "Yeah, I'm aware of it. I've read the letter that he sent to his constituents when he said he would never run for public office again because the franchise was so wide that no honorable person could ever serve in public office." Imagine what we'd think today. So anyway, Cousin Philip looked at me, he said, "Well, what do you think about that, cousin?" And I said, "I agree with every single word." And he says, "So do I." So anyway, we know that it's got to be something where power is broadly diffused enough, where you won't have, like in Latin America, an oligarchical elite exploiting working people. But you know it's got to be kept small enough where elections can make sense, where politicians are speaking to intelligent people and a small enough audience where they can really talk to them instead of having a congressional district with 500,000 voters. It's got to be something like that. My father always said that he thought that the system in England in the 1700s was ideal. A hereditary monarch, well, that ain't going to fly here. But from just historical things, he said to have a royal family that is not involved in politics. It is important to have the Queen's picture up on the wall in the post office instead of Bill Clinton's or Barack Obama's. That, you know, the technical head of state is not a party person. If I were British, I would be strongly in favor of keeping the monarchy just for that reason. Psychologically, it's important. But he said then you had some power that was in the House of Lords, an institution full of people whose families had had positions of prominence and had done pretty well over the period of centuries. And they had some power. And then the majority power was in a House of Commons that was elected by an electorate broad enough to see that social justice was done and that people weren't robbed and oppressed, but narrow enough where you didn't have people voting for a living. So, you know, we need to think through how will we achieve things like this. The most important issue for our new state is going to be, how do you achieve worthy elites? Contrary to what we're told in a democracy, all nations are run by elites. The people never run anything. They don't run anything in America today. It's the 1% on both sides that runs everything. You know, an elite is not per se a bad thing. In fact, it's an unavoidable thing. You go back to Florence. The Medicis were good elites. They picked up Michelangelo. They subsidized him. We have all of Michelangelo's art. You know, in America, we have Peggy Guggenheim and her modern art crap. So I would say that shows we don't have worthy elites. What happens in a democracy is that power goes to people like John Edwards. Anyone remember John Edwards of North Carolina? Yeah. He's a distant cousin of mine through General Pickens, and we don't claim him. Anyway, you know, John Edwards or Bill Clinton, you've got this sociopathic element. I recommend to all of you a very great book by a woman who teaches at Harvard Medical School. Her name is Martha Stone. It's called The Sociopath Next Door. It's only about that thick. You can read it in about 3 hours. It's truly eye-opening. 1 out of every 25 people is a sociopath. This kind of mental illness is something that can be tested fairly objectively. They show them lists of words that normal people react differently to. If you show a normal person, say, baby and murder, there will be a detectable different reaction to baby or kitten than to murder. Sociopaths, it's all the same. And these people are often intelligent. They know how to pretend to feel your pain, to quote one of them that was very successful from Arkansas. That kind of person is going to rise to lead society in a universal democracy of the kind we have. You're going to have a pack of sociopaths. The thing that makes our situation truly terrible and desperate is that among the rival groups with whom we are contending, the Jews, the blacks, the Hispanics, the American Indians, the Orientals, the more fervently they are attached to their ethnic group, the better their chances for personal success in life. If you're a black student, when I was at the University of Georgia, they had an organization called BALSA, the Black American Law Students Association. If you were president of the black law students, your chances of being a federal judge or getting with a big firm was better. They look at your resume, oh gosh, this guy was president of black law students. You try that with being president of the white law student association. You will never get a job interview anywhere, because we live in that kind of country in which your race and my race is hated and despised and persecuted, and the ultimate purpose and the objective of which is our genocide, which is really what our enemies want. They want us to cease to exist. They have hated us for 25 centuries. They will always hate us. They're never going to stop. There's nothing you can do to change their minds. They hate us, and they have power now, and they sense that victory is within their grasp. But the more loyal, get my point, the more loyal a Jew is. If he's president of the Hillel Society at the University of South Carolina, he's going to rise. Same with La Raza or any of these other groups. So we're in a situation in which the more committed you are to your race, if you're a minority group, the more powerful you are. But our race, and so all that commitment and loyalty goes through those communities. We are led by people like Bill Clinton and John Edwards, classic sociopaths. They have absolutely, the cardinal trait of a sociopath is he never connects. He does not connect his wife, his mother, his child, the other kids on the Little League team, the guys in his platoon. He never connects. And we're led by people who never connect and who know that their path to personal success lies in playing up to these militant minority groups. Now, this should not give us despair. This is actually good for us, because as I've said, it's this kind of situation that is going to force revolutionary change. Revolutions don't take place throughout history by Adam Weishaupt going into a basement in Bavaria and drawing up a plan for the Illuminati, or Lenin sitting down in Zurich and saying, okay, now you'll be Commissar of Omsk and I'll do the... Revolutions are opportunistic infections. They're brought about by the collapse of the regime. Our regime is doing everything possible to commit suicide. I would change nothing in what they're doing. And their behavior virtually guarantees success to us. So we have to plan, what kind of elites will we have? How will we set up a society in which the elites that rise from our race will be, as in the case of the Jews and the blacks, they will be the most loyal people to our race and not the sociopathic scum, which is what we have now. It's a hard subject. I don't have an answer to it. But y'all are young and y'all are smart and y'all have decades of thinking and experience ahead of you. That's what you have to be thinking about. And we have to make decisions now, thinking in advance, so that we don't have to try to make the decisions in the middle of a meltdown like happened in Yugoslavia or the Soviet Union, because this place is going to melt down. Americans have nothing in common. All they want is their money. They really don't like each other. Behind all the talk about how much we love the blacks and we love the Jews and the Jews love us, all these groups hate each other and irritate each other. When the money goes, there's going to be nothing binding these people together. And it's going to be fruit basket turnover. And hopefully we will get someone unlike a Lincoln. Hopefully we'll get someone like a Gorbachev, but smarter, who can put together a homeland for our people with a minimum of human suffering, unlike what Lenin did. But we have to make decisions like who fits in. And this gets us back to the question of who are we? Know thyself, know who you are. Mr. Miller talked about we could not work with Yankees. Well, as being somebody with two grandmothers of New England extraction, I don't know which half of me is to be at war with the other half.
You could work with them.
Okay. All right. To me, you have to start off with a general thought. Who fits in? And I've come up with my own formula. You have to know a little bit about theology to know about this. My formula is that people fit in if all of their ancestors were duophysitical Christians as of 1492. A duophysitical Christian is someone who believes that Jesus was both man and God. Monophysites believe the opposite. There's some churches, they're mostly very small groups down in Arabia, they'll believe that he's a man or he was all God. But the formula that early Christians worked up was that he was God and man. So what that would mean, if all of your ancestors were duophysitical Christians in 1492, before the conversion of the Indian tribes, it would include the Irish, which would have upset my grandparents. But they're okay. You're all right. We'll let you in. It would include the Icelanders. It would include the people in southern Spain. It would include the Sicilians. It would include the Norwegians. It would include the Russians. It includes all of the people from our mutual historic Christian white heritage. It excludes all the ones who are racially unacceptable. And race is the one unwavering thing. Race is the raw material from which the new society is created. You can never depart from the principle of race. But, contrary to what some people have preached, including a certain book publisher, who go unmentioned, he says he wants to just eliminate Christianity and just define everybody by DNA. This won't work. A race has to live in an idea, and an idea has to live in a race. There's no way you can turn your back on the fact that our race has been Christian now for 15 centuries. There's just no way you can do that. I don't think we can force everybody to be a Christian, but it's like there's a very famous Italian journalist who's become a leader in the movement against Muslim settlement in Italy. I forget her name. Some of you may know it, but there have been efforts by the Italian government to prosecute her. And she was on some television debate one time, and she said, these non-Christians are coming in, and blah, 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 blah. And so one of the people who was on the panel said, you are well known to be an atheist. And she replied, yes, but I'm a Christian atheist. Now, that actually makes sense. She is not a believer, but she lives in a country whose heritage is that of believers. And unlike Muslims and certain other Semites, when she walks by a church, she doesn't have this impulse to throw a brick through the window. So it makes sense. You can be a Christian atheist. You can kind of do that. There was a picture years ago in National Geographic of an Afghan woman. Some of you probably remember it. An incredibly beautiful Aryan young woman in Afghanistan. I heard people say, man, I'd like to marry her. Ooh. But she was gorgeous, and she was our DNA. But it would be utterly impossible for us to live with people like that. I saw a picture of the Muslim militia in Albania, in the fight in what's that little place, Bosnia. I was shocked. These guys looked like a troop of Norwegian Boy Scouts. They were tall. They had long heads. They had blue eyes. They had blonde hair. I was surprised. I talked to people I know from that area of the world, and they say, actually, that's true. The Muslims tend to be tall and blonde and blue-eyed because they were the Christians who ratted out. They were the ambitious, individualistic people like came here. They went over to the Turks, and once they did, their women were off limits to Turkish soldiers, so they didn't get the darker genes. But the fact is, if you and I went and said, oh, these guys are great genetic material, let's move in next door, this ain't going to work. You know, I could live in Sicily, not happily, but I could live in Palermo, surrounded by Roman Catholic Sicilians, and be able to go to bed at night with some reasonable assurance that I'd wake up the next morning, my kids wouldn't be killed, and that we have a lot in common. So it isn't enough. You can't leave DNA out, as a lot of religious people and conservatives want to do, but neither can you leave out the cultural and religious side of it. The two have to live with each other, and they have to learn how to defend themselves as a collective. We've got to be able to defend our race and advocate for our race without any kind of feeling that we're violating some kind of law to love everybody, because we owe much greater loyalty to people who are like us. Charity begins at home. You know, the closer you are to people, the more you love them. You all know liberals who love people around the globe somewhere, but who are just poison to be around. I have relatives like that, who exhibit exactly that. I'm very optimistic. I'm willing to, and I think we need to cast the nets wide. I don't think we need to restrict ourselves to Southern nationalism or to Southerners. I feel comfortable with Englishmen. I feel comfortable. I'm back home to Scotland. I felt more at home in Scotland than I do in Atlanta. This is a worldwide struggle for our people, our race, and our culture's liberation. It's taking place everywhere, and we have to be open. Even if one wants to be a Southern nationalist, it's a mistake. We have a large Yankee minority living in the South now. They should be dealt with gently. Like my father has some formula that he would tell the Yankees that he met who lived in the South. Well, many reconstructed Yankees make the best Southerners, that kind of thing. You don't tell them, you're going to be shipped back to Pittsburgh if we take power. That's not going to work very well. And like I say, my formula would be anybody whose ancestors were Dwappisite Christians in 1492, is pretty much, he's under the umbrella. We need to preserve, I think, these little countries like Estonia and the South and all that. But, we have to go back to sort of what existed before the Reformation, an idea of Christendom, that Erasmus could be a proud Fleming, but also part of the Christian overlay of all of Christian civilization. Now, I ask you in closing to open your minds. Now, this is a new agey thing. Open your minds to the totality of possibilities. We are very limited in our thinking, and we need to get rid of those limitations. We need to open our minds. People have very narrow ideas of how we will win this struggle. There'll be an election. Somehow it'll get so desperate that people will vote, and Richard Spencer will be elected president, and he'll straighten things out. He'll issue an executive order banning Negroes, this kind of thing. That, as I think, is unfeasible. But other people have the idea, it'll break down, there'll be a tremendous race war, and everybody just kill everybody else. And that's not a good idea either. But there are other, open your minds. I think I throw this out just for you to think about, because we're in the winter and we're thinking where we're going to go. Passive disobedience, civil resistance could be what breaks things up. It's interesting when that mayor in New York took up for the Black Lives Matter people and was coming out hard on the police, and then the blacks kill those cops up in New York. Well, nothing a mayor likes better than to be seen with the grieving widow of a cop and showing how he's down there with and Blasio tried that, and it didn't go anywhere. He couldn't get the photo ops he wanted, and when he went to the funeral, the entire New York Police Department turned their chairs around and sat with their backs to him. That broke him of the habit of running around with Black Lives Matter. He passive, and there are all kinds of ways this could sort out. And events are arguing for us in a way that no amount of rhetoric can. Y'all are here mostly because of events, not because of what I did when I was 20 years ago, what Jared Taylor did. You're here because events are pushing you and others like you in this direction. And that is good. I tend to think of the white people, the old hippie song, "Smile on your brother, try to get together." Y'all remember that. "Smile on your brother, everybody get together, try to love one another right now." I heard the remarks that Cushman made about how the South voted for Trump. I'll throw another issue out to you. What was the percentage that Trump got in the Georgia Republican primary? 35%. That won it for him. What percent did he get in the Massachusetts primary? 80%. So, it isn't just Southern white people that are getting restless and wandering off the reservation. And I'm willing to deal with those people. So anyway, y'all are going to have an interesting ride in your lives. I hope you will be intelligent heroes. You won't be the kind of people like Publius Syrus said, the coward calls himself cautious, and the miser calls himself thrifty. We don't want you to be cowards, and you have to accept there'll be a price to pay, but it's worth it. And I have faith in you, and I think when the last ding-dong of history is sounded in the struggle, you guys are going to be on top. Thank you.
Oh, I'm a good old rebel, now that's just what I am. For this fair land of freedom, I do not care a damn. I'm glad I fought against it, I only wish we'd won. And I don't want no pardon for anything I've done. I hates the Constitution, this great republic too. I hates the Freedmen's Bureau in uniforms of blue. I hates the nasty eagle with all his brags and fuss. The lying, thieving Yankees, I hate some worse and less. I hates the Yankee nation and everything they do. I hates the Declaration of Independence too. I hates the glorious Union, 'tis dripping with our blood. I hates their striped banner, I fit it all I could. Followed on as Robert the 4-year nearby. Got wounded in 3 places and starved at Pint Lookout. I caught the rheumatism at camping in the snow. But I killed a chains of Yankees, I'd like to kill some more. $300,000 Yankees are stiff in southern dust. We got 300,000 before they conquered us. They died of southern fever, southern steel and shot. I wish there was 3 million instead of what we got. I can't take up my musket and fight 'em now no more. But I ain't a-gonna love 'em, that is certain sure. And I don't want no pardon for what I was and am. I won't be reconstructed, and I don't care a damn. Oh, I'm a good old rebel, now that's just what I am. Oh, I'm a good old rebel, now that's just what I am.
When I posted my first video, many asked me, "Where is the catchphrase? Where is the catchphrase?" I bring you no catchphrase. I bring you a slogan of war. We must crush the urbanite. The urbanite must be destroyed. We must crush them.